Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Ferry with the Sports and Society program at the Aspen Institute, the home of Project Play. Welcome to the third event in our summer conversation series, all aimed at developing and pressure testing ideas that can help turn today's crises in youth sports as a result of COVID-19 into opportunity and rebuild America with the help of community-based sports. The four-part series is broken into 4 R's: recover, rebuild, reform, and resource. The most promising ideas will be reflected in a Project Play platform for action that we will take into the Project Play Summit in October, which goes virtual this year. The first event was on the recovery we need now. What do Parks and Recs, YMCAs, and other providers need to survive the next 12 to 18 months? The second event was on the rebuild, how to spend the nearly $1 billion a year in permanent federal funding for parks that was just signed into law, a program that we've been talking about for years in Project Play. A huge win, and there may be further opportunities for sports and recreation in upcoming infrastructure and transportation bills. Today's conversation is on sports governance, how to best organize the human, financial, educational, technological, and other assets that we have in this space to create the outcomes that we seek from our investment in youth sports. It's a timely conversation. Consider the national debate around whether to hold college football and other sports this fall. Here we have a pandemic that has already taken more than 175,000 American lives that we need to get in control. And the powers that be in college sports lacked a mechanism to move forward in a coordinated manner. The NCAA threw up its arms and said, we can only do so much. So the SEC and several other conferences plan to play while the Pac-12 and Big Ten won't. Some conferences will play football only, not because it's safer, but because a lot of money is on the table. Now consider the youth sports sector, which touches far more lives than college sports, generates far more money. We estimate, based upon our research, that it's at least $30 billion a year, and has far greater capacity to spread the virus, given all the communities gathering around sports across the country. In youth sports, the decision-making is even more chaotic than in college sports because there is no real sports governance to align activities with the needs of public health, communities, or kids. Let's take one Big Ten state, Illinois. We've seen some clubs try to bring back sports responsibly, but many others do so recklessly with no apparent penalties. One operator recently shared his account with us. As early as Mother's Day, teams started traveling outside the state for tournaments. Why? Because they could. So the governor had to step in, announcing new rules that shut down football and other sports deemed as higher risk. Then last week in Southside Chicago, a group of youth coaches from around the city held a press conference, reminding the mayor and governor of the critical role that sports play in the lives of kids. Since June, 5 kids ages 10 or under have been shot and killed. Quote, the way to stop the gun violence, to stop gangs is through youth sports, said one coach. They want parks and YMCAs to reopen, and they want support for more programs. The same call to action that Michelle Obama made at the 2016 Project Play Summit. I think we can all agree we want kids to play, and we want them to return as soon and safely as possible. What governance does is balance competing interests in the service of the public interest. It provides a venue for stakeholders to share and receive information. At its worst, it can add layers of bureaucracy. Nobody wants that. But at its best, it can connect silos and solve problems the marketplace on its own cannot. It can promote innovation and open up new markets for entrepreneurs. COVID-19 has laid bare fundamental flaws in the governance model for youth sports. Each state has a high school federation to guide school-based sports, but nothing for community sports. Providers are forced to turn to public health departments, but they're overwhelmed and not steeped in best practice in sports quite often. Imagine if each state had a Department of Sports and Recreation to coordinate activities across the sport ecosystem, to set minimum standards for health and safety, to certify operators, to ensure youth coaches aren't just winging it, that they're trained in key competencies from COVID risk minimization to CPR, concussion management, to how to coach kids effectively. Imagine if the federal government collected annual data to help states and cities identify sport participation gaps, or used its clout to reduce or eliminate the cost of background checks, or added quality filters to the distribution of federal grants, aligned with best practices in child and athletic development. None of this is happening now in the US, one of the few nations in the world without a federal Department of Sports and Recreation or equivalent body to guide the development and service of youth. Heck, we're still the only nation in the world that has yet to ratify the 1989 United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Sports policy experts have begun arguing for better governance of youth sports, aligned with 21st century needs. We've seen the cost of anything goes, from abuse scandals to preventable injuries to a lack of sport options for low-income kids. So let's explore what could work best at the local, state, and national levels. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. We want you to participate in this conversation. You can do so in two ways. Number one, through the chat function. Click the icon at the bottom of your screen to share your thoughts. Jennifer Brown Lerner will be hosting that part of the conversation and post related links. Number two, through the Q&A. Click the icons to send questions to our panelists. And number three, participate also, please, in our live polls. There'll be several of them during the conversation. We will send a recap of the conversation, including the video recording after the webinar. We hope you share it on social with the hashtag Project Play and tag us at AspenInstSports. Joining me today are three panelists. Max Cobb, CEO of US Biathlon, and most importantly for this conversation, chair of the NGB Council of the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee. NGB stands for National Governing Bodies. Congress in 1978 asked the USOPC and NGBs to coordinate the development of amateur sports activity in this country. So Max is a great person to have as part of this conversation. Second of all, we have Adriana Sanchez Paris, Secretary of the Department of Sports and Recreation for Puerto Rico. Sports governance is not an idea there. It's a reality, and she can talk about how it comes together in the US Commonwealth. And also we have Bridget Niland, who is Director of Youth Sports Initiatives at the Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo. She runs Project Play Western New York, a collective impact effort that engages youth sport organizations from across the region. Bridget, let's start with you. What is Project Play Western New York, and why is it needed?
So as you said, Project Play Western New York is a collective impact model. We were brought together, and if you can see the graphic, I've tried to keep my comments briefer on this because I could tell a long story of it. But it was brought together in 2017 with the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation. Mr. Wilson owned the Bills, and when he passed, much of his assets went into the foundation, and one of its spending sources is youth sports, which makes it very rare. There's not a lot of private philanthropy in youth sports that make it a spending focus. It started with the engagement of Aspen with the State of Play Western New York report. And that report really helped launch kind of our collective impact model. And really the focus of is we looked at our data, and the data indicated that 84% of our kids in this region, it's an 8-county region that is between Buffalo and Rochester, New York, and they weren't getting an hour of activity per day. The mission of Project Play Western New York is to ensure that all kids are active through sport regardless of zip code. A task force was formed, 30 members, a third funders, a third key decision makers in our area, and a third of experts in the area. That then moved into the creation of Project Play Western New York, and it's not a coincidence that it shares the moniker with Project Play from Aspen, where they were key partners and facilitators of our work, both here in Western New York and also in Southeast Michigan. Both Project Play Southeast Michigan and Project Play Western New York are funded by the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation. We set up an advisory council, and really the first thing we looked at is why those kids, why we had such a large number, 84% of kids not active enough. And our research indicated in pulling together the advisory council is that kids were either priced out, pushed out or burnt out of the 21st century youth sports model. And once we kind of had what was happening and what we wanted to do, we then set about using collective impact. We, Project Play Western New York, serve as the backbone. We have 2 full-time staff. Started out as just 1, but it's now 2 full-time staff. And we work with our advisory council, who identified 4 key areas. And you can see that down in the Project Play Western New York working groups. And those are the 4 key areas that we decided to tackle, trying to get to those 84% of kids. Why aren't they active? How can we help them become more active? How can we help them and their families become engaged in youth sports? And it's simply evolved over time. It's grown. And we now have separate stakeholder groups. The difference between stakeholder groups and working groups are things that we form out of the advisory council. Stakeholder groups are things that the community actually brings to us. So they read our information, they attend our community conversations, they decide to band together on around a particular sport or a particular issue. And then again, we provide them backbone support. I think in a few minutes, we'll talk a little bit more about how those 3 entities, the advisory council, the working group, and the stakeholder groups, have now inspired what we call Project Play community councils that kind of occur within each municipality, which has been our focus of trying to get those up and running in 2020. We'll also be adding youth voice and a policy and education working group to continue the conversations.
Great, thanks, Bridget. So what's the group? Well, there are a lot of groups working on this, in the region right now. But what has your group been able to achieve to date? What are some of the successes?
Sure. I mean, the one thing that's nice that we have the true benefit and feel truly grateful for is we do grant make. And since 2018, we've awarded over $1.1 million in grants to youth sports organizations or youth serving organizations. The key to a successful application for those grants is, though, built around doing something to advance the State of Play Western New York report, which is accessible on our website, very similar to the work that the Aspen Sports for Society group has done in other regions. We want people to come together to develop ideas and solutions, and then we'd like to try to test those out and fund those solutions. We've also held 4 large community conversations around issues such as sport in the young mind, which was dealing with the effects that not only youth who've experienced trauma bring to sport, but then also some of the things we need to be mindful if sport isn't done well for young people, what that can harm them from a mental health standpoint. So we address those issues. We've had a large community conversation just regarding what is youth sports in the 21st century? What are the good parts? What are the challenging parts? How can we come together as a community and work on shoring up the weaknesses in the model that creates the priced out, pushed out, and burned out phenomena in our region. We've also I think our communications, we have tried to step forward, Tom, in the absence of a statewide or even a region-wide, not even to speak of federal-wide. We've tried to step in and provide somewhat of an authoritative voice. I use that word authoritative carefully, but we know that people want some direction. They would like some information. They want to run a youth sports organization that benefits the kids, that creates a good learning environment for them. But often they're volunteers and the time is minimal, and actually their time being a volunteer is going to time out. So we try to make it as easy as possible through our website and our social media to run youth sports programs that really can help build the character and develop the child socially and emotionally.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of, the appetite for local coordination and leadership, where has it been strongest? Is it the sharing of best practices? Is it, partnerships among programs where they're,
really both of, really both of those, Tom. I mean, these large community conversations, I remember we set up our first one hoping for 150 and we had almost 400 people there. And everyone really engaged in coming up with solutions. And, like most regions, we have some post-industrial urban poverty and blight and the challenges that come there. And then we have suburbs, and then we span into rural areas. And the challenges to reaching the 84% of those kids in our region is unique in each of those spots. But what has been great is people have come together, shared ideas, brainstormed, and developed their own ideas and collaborations. We have a number of youth sport organizations that kind of work in the after school space, not so much the competitive space, but they've come together to kind of pair their offerings so that kids can have a swap out of experiences in after school programming, going from flag football to soccer to rowing to lacrosse, and kind of bring sports sampling to some of those populations who are not in a position to seek it out themselves.
Yeah. So how can cities that don't have Wilson's investment develop the leadership and perhaps the governance to improve youth sports? I mean, could such an effort be run through the mayor's office, for instance, or through a community foundation? They're all over the country. Or is it a matter of like revising the charter of a town recreation council to include a wider variety of actors as opposed to just the lacrosse person and the football and the baseball representatives?
Sure. I think the two suggestions you made, this absolutely can be a municipal-led effort if it's taken up by a mayor's office or a town recreation department. And that's actually kind of what's occurring in our Project Play community councils. Those are being driven by those entities. If you wanted to start the larger Project Play Western New York, the region-wide, if you take the grant making out of it, and again, very grateful for that, but I actually want to share that originally you think everyone's coming to the table because they're interested in a grant. We haven't found that to be the case. A lot of people want to come to the table for the conversation, and we just make it easy for them to come to the conversation. So this can be done with little cost once you kind of identify a group of leaders to come together and they recognize a problem, or they recognize that there may be a better way to offer youth sports, especially in those critical like 10 and under, which, you know, a lot of what, you know, is happening in Puerto Rico and those things, those entryways and the gateways. How can we ensure that it's as welcoming and accessible as possible to get kids engaged? So I think that the other, in addition to municipalities, I think, you know, most regions have a group of colleges and universities. And as you saw in the State of Play report coming out of Seattle, of Kings County, you know, which was backed up by a university, I think that is an additional resource that communities can look to. We built, when you put that the graphic we went over, we built what we were doing in Western New York so it could be replicated. And, you know, all of us Buffalonians are really proud, but things are challenging here in Buffalo, you know, in terms of being post-industrial. Not a lot of resources, not a lot of philanthropy. So when we have the 100 and so people that are involved in our work groups and our stakeholders, you know, we definitely have the feeling that if we can accomplish this in Buffalo, it can be replicated and done in other regions that may be as resource challenged or may have more resources at their fingertips, but especially using colleges and universities. And I think everyone can get started with the teamwork toolkit that Aspen offers. We were fortunate enough to be able to do a State of Play report because of our funder, but certainly you all have put together the tools to use that and to ask those questions within a group. And that's all what collective impact does. And it's such a wonderful model because it really helps the community come together to find solutions to a problem that they have identified for their own community.
Yeah, I'm going to flatter you here. One of the benefits that the region has is it has Bridget, meaning someone who is a strong champion who wakes up every morning trying to drive this thing forward. We have found that to be really useful whenever collective impact is attempted, is a really motivated champion. So it seems to kind of start there. Let me ask you, Bridget, finally, any policy intervention that you think would be helpful for local leaders?
You know, policy interventions will be necessary to take whatever solutions the collective impact models identifies and gives them permanency. The one that we've been looking more closely at that is, I would say, low-hanging fruit is the power of the permit. So in Western New York, it is mostly either school district user permits or permits through municipalities that allow youth sports organizations to do their activities to either teach or compete. So we've been working really closely with those the individuals that are issuing those permits and have started piloting in a few municipalities, just simply starting and asking questions of, do you train your coaches? Do you hold an orientation? Have you reviewed, and in our case, the 2021 question is going to be, have you reviewed, have you provided call all coaches to your youth sports organization, which of course is the Aspen document that kind of is a really nice simple pathway to start coaching kids. So we're also working on some other elements that in that coaches training realm to make it very easier. And we're going to use the power of the permit and collaborate, hopefully with even more municipalities, just simply to ask the question and provide those resources right at the permit stage.
Gotcha. So we asked each of our speakers to put together a slide with several suggestions on what they would like to see included or what they could recommend be included in the Project Play platform for action. And here are Bridget's ideas, and I think you've covered most of them here. But develop sports sampling collaboratives. I'm sorry, the first one is create region-wide networks of Project Play councils. That means town-by-town councils, people coming together, right, Bridget, and deciding on a shared agenda and mobilizing at a very hyper-local level. Second would be develop sports sampling collaboratives among youth leagues. And the third, leverage power of the permit, which Bridget just covered. Am I missing anything there or any additional context, Bridget?
No, those are the key elements. We have so much more to share in terms of the work. Please feel free to reach out to us or to engage with us through our website. I believe Jennifer's put that in the chat, but it's www.projectplaywesternnewyork.org, and follow us on social media. I want to thank you, Tom, and the Aspen team for offering these great webcasts and for including Project Play Western New York in this today too. So thank you for the opportunity to share. And we're here to help anyone nationally if they're trying to get something started similarly to make youth sport the most positive experience it can possibly be for our young people.
Well, thank you, Bridget. Stick around. We're going to have Q&A at the end here. I'm sure people have questions for you. Before we move to Adriana, our next speaker, I want to introduce a live poll here based upon the 3 points or suggestions that Bridget put on the table, which is, what do you believe will make the greatest impact on improving youth sports at the local level? Is it creating a region-wide network of town-by-town Project Play councils? Is it developing, and you don't have to call them Project Play councils, but basically any kind of entity where people come together and develop a shared agenda at a local level? Second of all, developing sports sampling collaboratives among youth leagues. And then third, leveraging the power of the permit with organizations to require trained coaches as a condition of field or facility use. So please share your thoughts, and we'll reflect them back a little bit later. So now I'd like to bring in Adriana. Welcome, all the way from San Juan, Puerto Rico. So Adriana and I met a year ago when she wrote me and said she's doing some very interesting things in Puerto Rico. It's introducing some new regulations, and would I be interested in speaking to people down there to talk about best practices in youth sports? And I learned about that Puerto Rico already has a Department of Sports in place, and they're using the power of government to organize the space. I'm like, wow, there is nothing like that in the US here. So I said, I need to come to Puerto Rico and learn more. And I did, wrote a piece for the New York Times on her very pioneering efforts down there. So again, welcome, Adriana, and good to see you again. Could you, please describe the role and responsibilities of your department and how it fits within the government of Puerto Rico?
For sure. The Sports and Rec Department is a government agency created by law, and it reports directly to the governor. So it's a cabinet member position. It's appointed by the governor and then confirmed by the Senate. And it was created in 1980, but the first steps towards what we know now started in 1927, actually, with an athletic commission that was created to regulate professional boxing and wrestling. So we have a long history of government intervention, to say so, in the sports world. And right now the department has a very broad array of responsibilities and obligations, but mostly we are in charge of making sure there are physical activities and sports and recreation opportunities for all the citizens in the island, from the youngsters to the very old people and our elderly. So we do that by actually providing the service and having programming in the island of various interests to the groups and sectors. And we also ensure the safety of those participants in the sporting practice, you know. So, and we do that in different manners. We have the education part, we have licensing, and we have obviously regulation, which is what brought me to you at the Aspen Institute. So that's mainly what we do at the department.
Gotcha. So what value do you think the department provides the citizens of Puerto Rico?
Well, it provides various different kind of things. First of all, it provides a straight public policy regarding sports, you know, so we have a clear view and a vision of what we want to do. So that's set up by the department. We also create the plan to meet those objectives, and we have the reach to go through all the island. We have 9 regions in the island, so we have the you know, the power to go through everywhere in the island. It grants or assures funding, so we are part of the general funding and budget process of the island. We have right now a $52 million budget. 12 of those go through to the Olympic system and movement, and then we have regulatory power. So we regulate, we oversee, and we enforce regulations to ensure the safety, as I said before, the safety of the participants while they're practice, specifically minors.
Gotcha. Now, you recently introduced new regulations on youth sports activity. August 1 was introduced. Maybe you can walk us through that, and what was the emphasis? We have a couple slides.
Yeah, so this regulation, it started with concern from the House of Representatives legislators because of the increase in the tournaments and games that kids were playing in the island. We could see clubs and schools and every team playing at the same time, so we could have kids playing 8 games a week. So he started a bill to order the department to create a regulation that would determine the daily amount of play a kid could have. That's it. It was one sentence. So from that, Governor Rosselló signed it into law, and that became our stepping stone to start a research process that lasted 2 years. It was burdensome, but it was very important for us to have the input from every sector and all the stakeholders that we have here in the island. So we met with physicians, coaches, presidents of federations, teachers, everybody we could think of. We read what they were doing in Spain, Argentina, Australia. We seek guidance from any guidelines we could have from the US on the professional sports, because we know this is something that was not only happening in Puerto Rico, but in the US. So since a long time ago, most professional leagues had been creating guidelines for their programs. So NBA has something, NFL, NHL, everybody had something. And we came up with this regulation to establish the parameters of participation. So we start at 5 and go up all the way to 18. And we created stages for development. We have 5 different stages, from introduction to sports to when you wanna be like in more, we call it high performance, but not necessarily, but when you're gonna go to like a next level elite. And from there on, we just wanna be sure that the kids have a safe environment. As Bridget said, that we could provide positive experiences for them, not only to protect them like physically from injuries, but also their mental health, make sure that they had the correct setting to practice sports. So we have the rights of the children playing sports, and it's a very well-rounded regulation.
Gotcha. So let's take a look at how the regulations apply to one sport in particular.
Yeah.
Basketball. So these were developed, correct me if I'm wrong, with your NGB, the USA Basketball, the Puerto Rico's version of the USA Basketball, right?
Yeah, well, we talked to federations, we talked to physicians and physical therapists, and then we started researching what were the recommendations. So we came up with this. These are the different stages that we developed. So it's 9 under, 12, and it goes on. And we have the amount of practice sessions they can have, and within that we have the time that they can play. So 9 and under, you should never go over an hour, but it will always depend on the kid's desire. So if it's half an hour and they're done, then so be it. He's a kid. And 2 games per week. And we continue through the ages with the different objectives each of one has, and then that's how we made like an average of best practices that we saw, and also taking into consideration Puerto Rico's culture. This is a very, very competitive market. Kids like to play, like to compete, like to win. Parents want their kids to win and be the best and be the star. So we needed to make a balance between what was happening and the amount of competition that we were having with what we learned was safer for them.
Right. And you also described the seasons. You tried to, instead of all those overlapping season stuff. Maybe we can look at the next slide here. So talk to me about this here.
Yeah, one of the main problems we have here, as I was explaining, is that everything happens at the same time. So you're not differentiating between school season and club, and then travel teams that go to the US, or tournaments that were being held here with teams from the US coming. So we created this calendar for everybody, every sport, each of the 15 sports that are in the regulation. And for example, basketball here in Puerto Rico, always the high school basketball or school basketball, it's played on the second semester of the year. So we kind of discuss with the federation also their tournaments and their sanctioned leagues tournaments, and came up with a calendar that would try to have them all leaving July as a recess month for almost everyone. And so that's how we came up with this itinerary.
Gotcha. And if someone violates these rules, too many games, or they're playing outside of their season, what are the penalties?
Well, we have fines from, first time you're given like a warning, an orientation, and then if you go on, it's $500, and it goes up to $1,500. And then we have the power to revoke the licensing. Here in Puerto Rico, everyone who wants to be part of the sports system or industry needs to come to the department, have his courses, get license certifications to be able to coach or to have a club, a league, or whatever it is in their interest. So we have the ability to revoke that licensing.
Yeah. What I found interesting when I caught up with you, had to be almost a year ago now, is the regulation, the law had been passed and the regulation hadn't been put in place yet, but already organizations were adjusting their behavior. They were shrinking down the size of tournaments. They were just generally being more thoughtful and careful in anticipation of these regulations coming down the pike. So what's been the reaction since then? Are you getting a lot of resistance to these regulations? or no?
Yeah, there's always resistance. Whenever you want to change the status quo, you're going to have resistance. But I think we've done a good job, and we can do even better, just educating, going around the island, having meetings. Now with COVID, this has make a shift towards digital platforms. So that gives us an opportunity to reach out to people that maybe we weren't able to do so before because of any limitation. So now we've seen an increase in participation in our seminars and conferences, and that helps everybody like get in the loop and just start to hear and repeat until they realize that this is it, that there's no turning back. It's already passed through all the legal framework here in Puerto Rico to have it established and enforced. So we hope to have the cooperation and collaboration of everybody, especially parents. I always say they're our first line, our first responders. So whenever we can have them engage in the conversations, let us know where and when something is happening, that gives us the opportunity to go directly to that organization and just talk to them. Our intention and our purpose is not to punish anyone or have them get out of sports. On the contrary, is to have them, be our partners and create a safer environment for the kids.
Gotcha. So as we did with Bridget and as we'll do with Max, asked for Adriana's 3 points of three suggestions in this case for any state that may be thinking about doing that here. And so you can see her 3 bullet points there. Create a state level Department of Sports and Recreation that reports to the governor. Second of all, develop charter and a scope that includes the responsibility to promote sports and recreational activities through engagement with the right partners, oversee the safety of participants through the provision of clear guidelines and regulations, license providers and certify that coaches are qualified. And then third, and it's important, identify a revenue source to fund department activities, e.g. sports betting, unclaimed lottery prizes, both of which Adriana's department benefits from, hotel room tax, and she also gets some general fund support. So it's going to differ from state to state here if anybody decides to go down this path, but those are some of her ideas. Anything, any other additional context there, Adriana, before I move on to Max?
Yeah, you can just go to our website, brdpuertorico.com, and you can have all the information. You can download the regulation and just look for us on social media, and we'll be able to answer any further questions. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. This is an awesome platform to have everybody like on the same page and rally together to help kids.
Absolutely. We'll stick around for the Q&A. All right, I'd like to introduce a live poll. What level of enthusiasm do you have for states creating a body to promote and guide youth sport activity? Think it's a great idea, or does it fall into the maybe category for you? Need to learn more, or does it fall into the no interest, don't even think about going down that path category? So let us know what you think. All right, we'd like to welcome in Max now. So Max, so people understand what NGBs are. NGBs are the body certified by the USOPC, Olympic Committee and Paralympic Committee, to pick the teams that represent the US in international competition in specific sports. They also oversee the development of those sports in the US as best as they can. A lot of them have very limited budgets to do so. These are roles laid out in the Amateur Sports Act of 1978, which some sports policy experts like Dion Kohler at the University of Baltimore, who recently wrote about the Amateur Sports Act in a very, I thought, thoughtful way, argue need to be updated for the 21st century. So Max, welcome. Thanks for joining us. What do you think of what Puerto Rico is doing? Any takeaways there?
Yeah, well, first, Tom, thank you very much for putting this together. Both Bridget and Ariana are really inspiring, and I really appreciate and applaud everything you and Project Play have done to bring this conversation to the fore and bring it out nationally. So I wanted to start there. But I believe that in general, sport in the United States and in particular youth sport have been dramatically underfunded. And so it's so inspiring to see Adriana's program in Puerto Rico working with a budget of $50 million per year. And for a sense of scale, $50 million is a little less than what the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee deliver to the national governing bodies for high performance sport in direct funding. There are a lot of other things that they do and things that are provided, but in direct funding for high performance sport programs, the number's a little over 50 million. But to see that resource being committed to sport and really youth sport in Puerto Rico is phenomenal, and I think there's really room for all of us to take some inspiration from what she's done there.
Good. So what do you think, Max, needs to happen at the national level in the U.S.?
Yeah, by our very nature, we are a diffuse governance society. So we like to have local government making decisions, and that has a lot of benefits and a lot of power to it. And as you said at the beginning, the last thing we want to do is to create these giant bureaucracies. But we have to recognize and we have to acknowledge the incredible health and education benefits that come to kids when they get the right amount of physical activity. And those benefits have to be available to every citizen in every community. And so government really does have an obligation, just as they do to provide educational programs, to ensure that some form of physical activity and recreation programs are being delivered. And so I think we need to get our arms around that as a country, as communities, as states, and deliver that to the citizens. And the kids deserve it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what's the role of, you know most specifically the NGBs and the USOPC. What's the role of those entities in driving progress?
Yeah, I think, first of all, a lot of good work has been done, and you've been involved. I remember when you came to the Olympic Assembly, I guess it was probably 6 years ago now, and spoke to us. And, the American development model has been developed during that time and has really provided guidance for all the NGBs, national governing bodies, which oversee sport, 55 different organizations, most of whom have adopted the ADM and are implementing it. And it provides guidance for how to deliver youth sports, not so much as a requirement, but as a best practice. And each NGB has adapted that for their own circumstances. Furthermore, in the last several years, the USOPC and the NGBs founded the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, which is now in its third year of operation, with a budget of over $15 million. And one of the main tasks of that organization is to ensure that everyone involved in sport at an NGB, but also at other organizations working under the NGB, are getting the education they need to make sports safe in America, and also to provide investigative capabilities in areas where it isn't seen as, or where there are issues. So those are two big things that have happened. You and I have been speaking for a number of years about how it may be time for a greater role by the NGBs and the USOPC together. And I think that time has come. We've seen that we have this ability to require and deliver safe sport training, the next step there really is, from my perspective, and I'm speaking for myself now, not as representative of any larger organization, but for myself, the next step forward is for us to require a baseline level education for all youth serving coaches, and to work with our partners, Parks and Rec and school systems and others, to make that a requirement for their coaches to be involved. I think that's something we can do. It won't be easy. Talking about 55 different organizations operating on a national footprint, with some huge other organizations, whether it's the YMCA or Parks and Rec. But it is something we can do. And, it really comes back to something Bridget said, which is people want leadership. They want to hear what the standards are. A lot of volunteer coaches out there just want to know how to do the right thing, how to do the best thing. And I think that's something that our group can work towards delivering.
Yeah, and as you well know, Max, these are tough times for NGBs and the USOPC. I mean, budgets have been hit hard. Why is pipeline and grassroots activation an opportunity in this environment?
Yeah, the NGBs, the sports, the athletes have been hit incredibly hard by COVID, by the delay of the Olympic Games, which, the Paralympic Games should be happening right now in Tokyo, but are delayed for a year. Those things have tremendous economic impact on the sport delivery systems in the United States, on the USOPC and the NGBs. So these have been really, really tough times. And, nearly every organization has had to make major changes in their operation. But I think what's clear is that we will all come back. There will be an after COVID, and sport will be really important in that. And as we all have time to contemplate the restart, I think it is the right time for us to think about some bigger initiatives that we can do together.
Gotcha. All right. So maybe we go to the next slide here. We asked Max what his 3 points, what he would like to see in the Project Play platform. And they were to require the USOPC to work with the NGBs to develop a common youth sport education and certification program required by each organization delivering youth sports in America. Courses should be online and include an American development model, safe sports training, and background checks. Second, together the USOPC and NGBs should build a plan to make sport more accessible to every child in America. And third, fund this plan through a combination of sports betting and maybe a national sports lottery. We've seen sports betting come up twice. That was in Adriana's slides as well. Anything to add here, Max?
No, I just want to say, Tom, you and I have been talking about these things for a number of years. These really reflect my own view of the way forward for sport in America, and the things that I will be discussing with leaders in the NGB world and the USOPC going forward.
Awesome. Okay. I'd like to introduce a poll question, and then we'll take some Q&A. We're running a little bit short on time here, but the poll question would be, what level of enthusiasm do you have for the USOPC and NGBs doing more to guide the development of youth athletes and programs in this country? Again, great idea, maybe, or no interest. Okay, terrific. So, team, any questions? Jennifer, any questions from the audience?
Hi, actually there are quite a
Marty.
few, and we don't have time to get to all of them, so I've tried to combine a few. Hopefully you hear the gist of your question being asked. But one of the topics that has come up a lot, we've talked about one of the roles of government oversight being to enforce coach training requirements. How can these coach training regulations be enforced and enforced in a way that doesn't increase inequality between organizations with resources and those without? I'll ask Adriana to respond to that first, since you actually have those regulations in place in Puerto Rico. But I'd like to hear Bridget's and Tom's thoughts as well.
So here, what we did is, what we do is we actually agree and come and get into agreements with the federations. So it's not another burden on the coach or the person interested in being part of the sports movement. And then we have a great team here at the department, and with our regions, it helped us just go visit and then get a hold of what's going on. We do have to improve, obviously. There's still a lack of resources, even though we have the department. I will not say it's the best, most efficient as everyone. We have room for improvement, but we do have a little bit of a structure that help us oversee that the coaches are complying, and of course we rely also on federations to help us.
And Bridget, how would you see enforcement of coach training regulations impacting Western New York? Where I know you have some very large organizations involved in Project Play Western New York, and also some very grassroots organizations.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties. Hopefully you can hear me. I don't know if you can see me. I think it's a great question too, especially the equity piece. Certainly when we want to look to the power of the permit, we do not want to create an unfunded mandate that, you know, heaps even more stress on these youth serving organizations that make amazing things happen with very little resources. What we're working with at Project Play Western New York is to really kind of create what would be a free type of orientation to each youth sports organization that will have a train the trainer type of aspect. So those folks can be invited in and meet with youth sports organizations at the start of their seasons. We also, again, want to provide the many online resources, including the Nike's How to Coach Kids. And that's a 30-minute online. So when we ask that question or prompt the question of, are your coaches trained or what type of training? What we're working at Project Play Western New York is to create a couple pieces of the curriculum that can slide into already existing curriculums. Because as we know, each NGB, depending on their level of engagement down to the youth level, already require some coaching. And we don't want to heap, again, too much on the volunteer coach. So we're going to offer a set of components that kind of can mesh in, but certainly don't want to create an unfunded mandate situation. And that's where the collective impact team comes together and develops a workable solution that is accessible to all youth sports organizations.
Yeah, I would agree, Marty. I think it's a matter of just keeping costs as close to zero as possible, making, you know, the delivery of the tools as easy to use as possible by organizations. But I would also add, it also might be tied into the recruitment piece as well. We had a really good conversation on the last webinar about national service, and can we take, you know, all these college athletes, you know, in tennis and other sports coming out of college and have them do like a year of community service. Well, if we're more intentional about bringing new populations into the youth coaching pipeline, when we do so, we can introduce them with coach training, rather than just asking the same set of coaches right now to do more than what they're doing.
A lot of questions, Max, about the role of NGBs and about the American development model. You're the CEO of US Biathlon, which is not a particularly widely played sport in the United States. So I imagine most of your work is dedicated to the US Olympic team and the elite level. And there are a lot of NGBs, I think, that are in the same boat. So how do NGBs, not just the smaller ones, but even the larger ones like US Soccer, USA Gymnastics, refocus resources on that developmental side and that grassroots side when so many of them are really dedicated to the high performance?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. And I think that we have seen over the last 6 years a real renewed focus on youth sport activity and guidance for youth sport, the creation of the American Development Model, and even within my organization, which, as you say, most of the people who get involved in biathlon come through U.S. skiing or learn to ski in another program before they begin biathlon in their early teens. But I think that those resources are being made more available now. And because we're seeing, because of the law which was put in place that requires NGBs to have their member coaches educated in safe sport, we are seeing a greater focus on NGB education at the youth sport level. I think the central issue for all of us is that we recognize that NGBs aren't the only national organization or even regional organization that's delivering sport. There's AAU, there's Parks and Rec, many other organizations, and not all of those people who are delivering youth sport are members of NGBs and have access to the educational modules that exist there. So I think that's why I think that there is a role for us to play in broadening our reach. And I agree absolutely with what was said earlier about ensuring that there are no financial barriers for youth sport coaches to be able to get the training that they need. Wouldn't it be an interesting thing if we could actually say to youth sport coaches, we're going to pay you to take this training rather than you need to pay to take the training?
I think we have time for the last set of questions. And this question is about school sports, which is probably the most regulated part of the youth sports ecosystem currently. First, a question for Bridget. How do school sports tie into the local network you have with Project Play Western New York? And then Adriana, is the school sports system in Puerto Rico similar to the rest of the United States, where there's a real focus on school sports in high schools and middle schools? And how is school sports tied into the regulations you've developed?
Yeah, it's our collective impact model includes the leaders of our scholastic sports, both at the primary and middle school level, as well as the director of, in New York State, their sections. And so our Section 6 director, who oversees the competitive scholastic sports. It's a great point too, because when you looked at priced out, you can only fix so much about priced out. So it is particularly important to work with those school districts that are serving the kids in greatest needs to ensure that there is a pipeline that works through the elementary and middle schools and then picks up and provides those more competitive youth sport experiences at the scholastic level. And that varies, because we also know it's a separate webinar on how some kids are leaving the scholastic model to play in the club model. But in our region, we found that those students that are priced out, those kids that are priced out, the way to combat that is to have a strong scholastic sport experience. And so they're part of our collective impact model. We've started to do intramurals and different things at the middle school and primary school level to kind of build the demand and capacity build up to offering more at the scholastic level. So they're very much involved.
Adriana, is school sports part of the youth sports culture in Puerto Rico like it is in the mainland United States?
Definitely. Here in Puerto Rico, we have a mix of U.S. School development system and then European Federation systems. So we have a little bit of everything. And we have, especially in private schools, the public system still a little bit behind and lagging in that sense. But yes, it is a very deep-rooted culture. And the regulation goes on to that. So our law doesn't distinguish between school sports or people or on certain social standards. So we are here to ensure the safety of everyone. So our regulation does apply to school sports and tournaments, leagues, events, and there's a compelling governmental interest to provide and ensure the safety and health of the kids. So this regulation does apply because we do see a problem here with the amount of games and competitions and workload on the school system. So yeah.
Well, terrific. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. I want to thank you, Adriana, Max, and Bridget. You're terrific. I wish we could clone each of you and then push 1,000 of you around the country, and I'm sure we would see the key KPI in this country go up significantly in terms of kids playing and coaches trained and otherwise. I want to thank our team, Jennifer, Fumi, John, Emily, Marty, Rania, and you, our Project Play Network. Your participation in this session, your comments and feedback will help us shape the ideas that get included in the Project Play platform for action that we will introduce later this fall. The final event in our summer conversation series is September 16th on the resources we need now. At the Project Play Summit, we will release a simplified version of our Teamwork Toolkit, a free DIY tool, do-it-yourself tool that local leaders anywhere can use to mobilize their community to get and keep more youth playing sports. What other tools do organizations need to make community-based sport the dominant model through age 12? How can high-quality curriculum get packaged up to recruit and retain kids at scale? How can national sport organizations and other trusted brands support them? How can not-for-profits, entrepreneurs, and schools collaborate with them most effectively? Please join that discussion on September 16th. Then join us October 13th through 16th for the Project Play Summit itself, where virtually we will help our network mobilize around the most promising ideas in the platform. Next week, we'll announce some of our keynote speakers. It's a really impressive group, so sign up today to make sure you don't miss out. The workshops are nearly sold out, but most events are free. Finally, a reminder to please sign up for our newsletter. That's where we will be sharing upcoming webinars as well as reports and essential resources to help leaders, coaches, and parents navigate these uncertain times. And if you don't already, please follow us on social media at Aspen Inst Sports for the latest on our Project Play reports, as well as news and resources. Thank you all. Play safe, keep innovating, and see you next time.